2015 budget. President Riley.
Thank you again, President Smith. I think we're pretty much all aware now that planning in this new block grant era requires that we look at our budget process a bit differently from the way we've looked at it in the past. We need now to look at the full picture of expenses and revenues and how our UW system priorities fit within that picture so we can make some choices about how to allocate our activities within that block grant. In keeping with the flexibilities secured during the last biennial budget process, the governor's proposed 2013-15 budget provides for one sum of GPR that can be used for utilities and fringe benefits. Those same funds may be used for other UW system priorities, including academic programming and employee compensation. At this early stage, however, we do not know many key details about our operating expenses for the coming 2 years. Narrowing our 18% compensation gap remains a top priority for the UW system, and the governor's proposed budget would provide the Board of Regents with new authority to establish compensation plans for UW system employees. I should remind folks that that authority is not yet provided, so we must continue to work through the existing process with the Office of State Employment Relations, or OSER, as they work on developing the governor's proposed compensation plans for all state employees. Those plans have not yet been announced. Once we know more about the full compensation picture for the coming biennium, we can add that to the information about utilities and fringe benefit costs and other of our operating expenses. Based on that bottom line expense number contained in the final budget, we will know what kinds of revenues will be provided and finally what tuition adjustments may be necessary to achieve a balanced budget. Even with these uncertainties, it does seem clear that the governor's budget sets the stage for some positive movement on employee compensation, along with the lowest tuition increases in many years, we certainly hope. So here to give us a more complete picture is Associate Vice President Frida Harris. Frida.
Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to walk you through some of the provisions of the 2013-15 executive budget as it relates to our students, UW system institutions, and our employees. And I have to tell you, it's been a while since I was able to say it's a pleasure to talk about budget. First, we'll take a moment to look at the revenue sources for the UW system to set the context for the changes that are included in the budget. In 2012-13, the UW system's annual budget totaled $5.9 billion. But the primary focus that we'll be talking about today is the GPR fee funds that are used to educate our students. So we need to get down to those numbers. First, remove federal funds. When we take away federal funds, which are primarily provided to us for financial aid, for research purposes, and for overhead, we get down to a $4.06 billion budget. Then we remove gifts, grants, and contracts, which primarily are provided to us for specific reasons. People will give them to us, they tell us what they want us to do with those resources, and we can't use it for just any purpose. That gets us down to $3.48 billion. Then we remove the self-supporting operations like our auxiliaries and hospitals, which have to charge to recover the cost of their own operations. Once you take that down, you're down to $2.4 billion, and that's the funding that we'll be discussing today, which is a combination of state resources, which we call GPR, and the tuition dollars that are paid by our students. This amount is composed of $1.1 billion of GPR and $1.3 billion of tuition. We also have in the budget some restricted GPR, and the purposes of that funding are defined in the statutes, and we can only use the money for the purposes for which we got it. Included in that would be debt service, funding for the State Lab of Hygiene, and funding for the veterinary diagnostic lab. So when you take that out, we're down to about $2.19 million. That's really the more flexible funding that we can use for educating our students. This is the funding that we can use. We want to add new programs, and we can also use that money to reallocate for new priorities that we want to address, but that means cutting back on something else. So you add something, you take something away so that you can live within the dollar amounts that you have. My presentation of the governor's budget will cover the following areas. I'm going to talk about overall UW budget, cost to continue, flexible block grant funds, new initiatives, program revenue, and financial aid. In terms of the overall budget, this budget does not include any cuts or lapses. And I've gone back and looked, and it's been since the 80s, actually, since we've had a budget that did not include any types of cuts or lapses. When we look at the budget, it also includes a continued implementation of the block grant. What is happening there is that gives the board the ability to address the priorities and also to address many of the threats that were discussed this morning by Senior Vice President Mark Nook that would affect the growth agenda. We would be provided a block of resources where we can direct them to the highest priorities. And then the board would be given the compensation, authority, and responsibility. So the board would be able to determine how to pay its staff, but also have to determine where the resources would come from. In addition, by not having cuts and lapses included, we'll be able to use any efficiencies that have been created within our institutions to help address our instructional needs. And in the past, because of cuts and lapses, those funds have really flowed out of the university system rather than staying in there to help improve instruction. This budget provides new funding for new programs, and it also includes some requirements for expanding the Wisconsin GI Bill and credit transfer requirements. This is a schedule or a graph that will show where the new funding is coming into the university. There's a total of $181.4 million of new GPR or state resources that are being provided to the university over a 2-year period of time.
And Rita, what's the base that 181 is bouncing off of? Is that the second year of the expiring budget?
The base that the budget is coming off of these funds would be coming off of the $1.1 billion that was adjusted from our annual budget in the prior year. So when you look at this, though, it's talking about 2 years. So you have to look at this as about $2.4 billion or so of resources. So that's an increase over that. So first we'll talk about cost to continue. Included in the cost to continue funding that we received from the governor in the budget is $20.8 million, and that funding is to cover the cost of increases to leases, for salaries for selected classified employees where there were increases provided in the 11-12 year, and to cover the increased cost of fringe benefits from 11-12, which was last year. So it's catching up to where we were as far as actual cost in the prior year. In addition,
what was that cost to continue in the past? Why do I think it was greater? Was that utilities that has changed?
The cost to continue a lot of times has been significantly higher because of the addition of utilities is one of the things that would be there. Another piece, if you add it up together, the debt service, you'll see that there was a separate number there for debt service. And our fringe benefit costs have been significantly higher. Last biennium, the cost that we had was also higher due to furloughs. We were removing the furloughs from the budget.
But that figure that we used to look at was in the 70s to 80s. You were including debt service in that?
When it got to the governor's budget, it would have included the debt service, and the amounts that we were talking about would have been well over $100 million. Because what you're doing is getting funding and have that same same amount in the second year. The budget also includes $89.4 million over 2 years for block grant resources. Again, this is the funding that we would have that's more flexible for use for addressing the board's priorities, but this basically replaces a separate set of funding that the state typically has for state agencies called the compensation reserve. The compensation reserve is where they typically set aside funding for the increased costs of fringe benefits over the biennium, as well as any state share of a pay plan. This budget changes how the university operates by putting that funding into the block grant. And the board can then decide how much you want to prioritize or need to prioritize for addressing those particular areas. In addition, this funding, because the block grant for the university includes the utilities appropriation, will need to cover any cost increases or changes related to the cost of utilities related to new buildings or inflation.
Chancellor Gowdy.
Yeah, I think following Regent Walsh, we've often talked about those three items as one amount of money. Is that correct? What you have broken out as cost to continue debt service and block grant in the past would be all combined under the broad umbrella cost to continue.
A part of it. The utilities funding would have been in the cost to continue. It would have been separately laid out because it was a separate appropriation. We would have been able to see how much they were going in there for utility cost changes. The funding, though, that's related to fringe benefit cost increases for the current year and the next 2 years, and anything related to pay plan would never have shown up in our budget. We would have been supplemented for that every year from the compensation reserve. We don't, as President Riley said earlier, have a breakdown at this point for how much is going to be needed for each component, how much for fringes, how much for utilities, how much for compensation. And we'll be working over the next few months to help to refine estimates so that you'll be able to prioritize that before we get to the annual budget. The executive budget includes $20 million for incentive grants, and that funding is broken out into 3 different categories where we can use the dollars. The first is economic development for establishing and growing businesses in Wisconsin, including the creation and retention of jobs. We'll have to coordinate that work with the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. The second area that we can use the resources for is skilled workforce to address high demand fields that are identified by the Department of Workforce Development and the Wisconsin Technical College System. This funding could also be used for student internships and cooperative work experience opportunities or to enhance research and development. The third category that we have is to address affordability related to reducing time to degree, having high school students participate in earning credits towards a college degree, or improving credit transfer. We're required to submit a plan for how we would distribute these funds to the DOA Secretary within 90 days of the effective date of the bill. We've established, or we're working on establishing, a group that would include institutional input that would look at the components of that and help us to develop a plan.
Would they control disposition of those funds subject to approval of the plan, or will we have this money going forward?
The funding that is provided is $10 million of annual resources that would be part of the university's base. However, a requirement for the plan is that it not be base building at any institution. So we'll have to work through how to develop a plan that will address those issues. This is new funding that was added in the budget. Part of this is the flexible option, where there's $650,000 in the first year of the biennium. That increases to $1.3 million in the second year. And that will help develop programs and course offerings in a self-paced manner with competency-based credits. The Carbone Cancer Center was provided $3.75 million of resources for one-time matching grants. And there's an additional $3 million for the Wisconsin Academy for Rural Medicine and the Training in Urban Medicine and Public Health program, which you see there as WARM and Triumph. The Carbone Center, the WARM Triumph, and the incentive grants were things that were not included in the Regents' request to the governor. It was added as a governor's initiative. And in your budget, you requested funding related to quality access and economic development, which was not funded. But these resources in the incentive grant should help us to be able to address some of the priorities that you were planning to address with quality access and economic development.
I'm confused. I understand the Carbone and WARM because that's a big
David, can you use the mic again?
How does that help us address the other things that we didn't get? I mean, that money's really designated just for them.
Right, the Carbone and the WARM.
Right.
Right. You requested the Flex Options Fund, and that was provided. The incentive grants, though, the one that I just showed you before, the $20 million, because it can address helping to move students through faster.
I thought you meant one of those.
Oh, no.
And
no.
how much did MCAL get? Do you know, there was a match with the hospital stuff.
I can get that information for you. I don't have that.
They got an award, too, which was good. 7.6.
So
That's good. Yeah.
the budget also continues the flexibilities that were provided in the 2011-13 budget, where the restrictions on the board's ability to determine tuition rates and establish tuition rates for all students was retained. And there are no caps or limitations on the board's ability to establish those rates. Next, I'll just take a moment to talk a bit about some of the things you heard a little bit about this morning. What's been happening with the university as far as enrollment, support for students, and financial aid. Looking at this graph, you can see that the enrollments for the UW system are close to the historical highs. And this will help us as we move forward into the future. If we can continue to increase our retention and decrease time to degree, we'll be able to have more graduates faster to address the state needs. This is a graph that shows who's paying for the cost of instructing our students. If you look at this, the blue line shows the state share of instructing students. The red line is the student share. Back at the time of merger, at the beginning of the system, the state bore the largest share of the cost associated with educating students. They were paying about 75% of the total cost. Now, where we are right now, the students are paying about 70% of the cost of their education through tuition. This budget could give us, begin the trend of helping to close those numbers by providing an investment in state resources toward education, and also by allowing us to potentially have the lowest tuition increase that we've had in many years. If the governor's budget is continued the way that it is with the funding and the flexibility, that's where we would be, is we would begin to close that gap. The executive budget does not provide any increases in funding for the Wisconsin Higher Education grant program, and it doesn't provide any additional funding for the financial aid programs that are included in the UW System's budget. However, it does provide $4 million in increases in each year for the Wisconsin Covenant program so that it can support the next cohorts of students who are coming in under the Covenant program. In addition, the federal program, the Pell program, the maximum on that grant is also going to increase in the next year. So there will be an increase in financial aid beyond what is there for the Covenant. We've got a number of statutory language changes that I'd like to quickly move through and highlight for you. We're still working to understand the full implications of those statutory changes, so we're planning to provide you with additional information about the impact of those changes at a future meeting. Again, we talked a bit about compensation and the board's ability to establish pay plan for its employees. In addition to that, there were some restrictions on what the university could use its base resources for as far as compensation is concerned, and those restrictions were removed in the budget. For employees, there will be an additional $50 per month health insurance premium for those employees who use tobacco products, and all state employees will be offered a high deductible health care plan. There were also changes related to the ability to rehire employees who have retired. So a employee or new rehired annuitant would have to give up their annuity or their pension if they worked more than 2/3 time in the future. And in addition to that, the separation period that they had to be away from the job before they could return has increased from 30 days to 75. The UW system and the technical college system would be required to establish a core credit transfer agreement for no less than 30 credits of undergraduate coursework that could transfer towards a degree. Tribal colleges and private institutions could participate in this agreement if they wanted to, if they chose to. There are some provisions related to sale of property. The budget recommends enabling the sale of state heating plants, and it removes exemptions that the UW system had from DOA's and the Building Commission's authority to sell or lease property. The budget includes a provision that will help us by allowing the UW institutions to continue to participate in certain internet consortia that advance research. This was something that our institutions were very concerned about because they didn't think they were going to be able to continue to work with other higher education institutions if we weren't able to do this. If there are any new agreements or new consortia that are formed, the DOA secretary would be the one to approve that. The budget includes an expansion of Wisconsin GI Bill benefits for veterans who did not enter service from Wisconsin but have lived in the state for more than 5 years, 5 consecutive years, and their children and spouses of disabled veterans who are more than 30% disabled would be able to also benefit from the Wisconsin GI Bill. There was a 10-year limitation on the ability for spouses of disabled or deceased veterans. That limitation has been removed. And they have established a 2.0 GPA requirement for veterans to continue to receive the benefits. Yes?
Frida, does the tuition remission for the veterans program still come out of our budget?
There's about $6 million, a little more than $6 million statewide that provides some funding for the technical colleges and the UW system. But the balance of that comes from tuition revenues that the students are paying.
How much do you think that is?
What was paid last year, I believe, was about $13 million out of the university's budget. You talked a bit about this this morning, the course options program. The budget would recommend that public K-12 student could take up to 2 university courses at one time. The school board would pay the university the cost of providing that course as determined by DPI. What we don't know right now is what the interaction is between this course options, this expanded course options program, the youth options program, the CAP program, or the dual enrollment program that the UW Colleges has been working on with DPI. The budget bill would not allow UW institutions to establish or operate a new charter school, but it does permit them to contract with an individual to operate a charter school. The language that was in the budget or in the statutes previously that required the board to approve those contracts has been removed.
Priya,
Yeah.
can you just explain the difference between bullet point number 1 and bullet point number 2?
It's an interesting language thing, but basically what it's saying is that an institution can establish or operate a charter school through an individual, through contracting with an individual. They can't just do it on their own. And you have to go through an oversight board in order to get the approval to do it.
But bullet point number 1 says you can't do that.
The institution itself can't do it. You have to contract with
you
somebody.
can't. I see. Okay.
What would be the impact of this on our current charter school relationships?
We've got charter school relationships at Milwaukee and Parkside. It's saying you can't establish or operate a new one, so they can continue
So they're grandfathered.
Yes. Yes.
Excuse me.
Go ahead.
We have a
Go ahead, Jim.
5-year renewal on those, and would the grandfathering sustain through renewals in the future?
It appears that there is no impact on their ability to continue to operate the ones that they have. So if there is a contract, and I think we probably ought to throw that over to our legal counsel rather than have me do law here on the floor.
I was kind of nodding and giving signals to Jerry, but the answer is it is grandfathered. So what's in play now at Milwaukee and at Parkside can remain. So this is a prospective law only, and so those will continue to function as they always have.
Even through.
Yes.
I didn't catch that. For the renewal of one of the existing charters, would that still come to the board?
That's a little unclear at this point. I think, though, that they would continue to have, that they'd be able to be renewed and continue in their existence. The piece about the board's approval is out, and we still maybe need to figure out whether that would apply to renewal as opposed to something new.
Save a lot of my time.
Okay. Charter schools reporting requirements. We have 3 new reporting requirements that are included in the budget for the system as a whole. One is on the fair market value of all real property within the system. Another one is an annual report on economic development grant activities, and then we have a report on core credit transfer agreements. In addition to that, the UW-Madison would have to do a report on the WARM program, the Wisconsin Academy for Rural Medicine.
Rita? The biennial inventory of the fair market value of all real property, that's a major expense.
We carry that.
David Miller can give us more information on that.
It was unintentional, and we expect it to be removed.
I was going to say, that's the appraisers got it in there, didn't they?
No.
David will do it.
It's tied to language about surplus property, and the error in drafting was the fair market value is only supposed to be done on property that we would surplus,
That we would
which
declare
makes perfect
surplus.
sense.
Yeah,
And it just came out wrong.
All right.
Just a couple of other things that I should mention. We had requested some additional authority related to UW procurement. That request was not included in the budget. And in addition to that, we had requested funding for the student technology fee, or it wasn't funding, it was authority we were requesting. That was not included in the budget, but of course the board can then decide whether or not that is a priority as you look at what revenues you have to generate. So we've now moved through the first two phases of the budget process, including the submission of the university's budget in September, our request, and the governor's budget. So now we're at the point where we're waiting to see what will be included in the capital budget, which should be coming out very soon. And then they'll begin hearings, and Joint Finance will take action between April and May. Is typically about the time that they would begin to take action. And following that, we'll have to have action by the Assembly and Senate. They will develop a legislative budget, which will then be sent to the governor for veto. There's a great deal of interest from people wanting to know what the university's budget is going to look like, what are the components of it. But as you can see, there's still a lot that needs to be done. There's some recommendations for flexibility and authority that has to be approved by the legislature before we can actually move forward with some of the recommendations that were there. So at this point, I'd be happy to address any questions that you might have related to the budget.
Regent Drew.
Okay. Help me understand. Our request was $36 million. Budget request, correct? Okay. And this is publicized as $181 million in new money for the university. So there's about $145 million there that you could explain to me where that is in terms compared to our request. And I think you probably already did it once, but if you could go through that again so I could understand that better.
Okay. The cost to continue was funding that we requested.
We requested $23 million.
And for cost to continue?
Yeah.
The cost to continue actually is, when you add in the tuition dollars that we had, would get us to about $29 million. The cost to continue did not include the financial aid funds and the student technology fee funds that the university had requested.
Okay, but what we asked for, $23 million cost continue, was part of our $36 million that we asked for.
Correct. So you're looking at GPR. When you look at the GPR dollars, what you don't see in this $20.8 million is funding for financial aid for our minority and disadvantaged programs. That money was not provided in the governor's budget. Debt service is always added.
So we're subtracting the $20.8 million from the $181 million?
No, you were, okay, when you were looking at the funding for cost to continue, we got almost everything we asked for in cost to continue in the Regents' request, except for the financial aid. So that's the difference between your 23
okay, I forget the 23 and the 20, but so we got the cost to continue was part of our ask.
The cost to continue was part of our ask.
Part of our ask to 23 million.
Right.
20 million, 23 million.
Right, and in addition, we asked for the quality, access, and economic development funding.
Right, we asked for 11.5.
In ongoing dollars, it was about $17.8, $18 million.
Okay, I see where you got the 17.
Yes, a combination of the GPR and the tuition dollars.
I see, okay.
So while we didn't get the quality, access, and economic development dollars, we got $20 million in incentive grant funding.
Okay, so that's a wash, basically.
Pretty much. And then our budget request never includes debt service. That's always added by the governor as part of his budget.
Okay,
So that $42 million is an add-on to get to where we need it to be.
Okay, so that's over, in other words, we didn't even ask, that's not part of our ask.
Right.
So to say that we're getting 181, that's not really, that was part of what we would expect to get anyways.
It is part of what we would expect to get as part of the cost to continue that the state normally provides, but it is new GPR to the system, so.
But so in one sense, you could subtract that from the 181.
You could if you, yes. Then we had requested the flexible options funds. We requested $2 million of GPR. In addition to that, there was some tuition money that was associated, $1 million. That was not included in the governor's budget, but again, since you have authority over your tuition, that's something we can discuss later. The Carbone Center and the WARM funds are funds that were added by the governor. It was not part of your request, so that's new money that was beyond that. The big piece is the $89.4 million of GPR block grant funds. The problem with talking about that is we don't know how much of that would have been in a compensation reserve to cover fringe benefit costs and compensation increases into the future.
Do we have any idea of how much of that would have been in the compensation reserve fund?
The vast majority of that would have been there because the other piece that they would typically have built in was utilities. And right now we're running something of a surplus on our utilities.
So if you take all that out, did we get the $36 million that we asked for?
Pretty close.
Okay.
But we got some other things too.
Rita Walsh.
Just a lot of information. And I just had 3 quick questions. If you went back to the first slide that you had where you were subtracting everything from our budget, right there, what do you mean by hospitals there? I ask this not because I'm questioning the budget, only because I'm interested in the lawsuit over the hospitals.
There's very little associated with the hospital in our budget.
Actually, is there anything?
There is.
What is it?
There is some money associated with the hospital authority. It's a very small amount of GPR.
But what is it? Because we're in a lawsuit saying there's nothing, and you've got something up there. I'm just asking you what it is.
Darryl, would you like to talk about the funding for the hospital authority? It's just a flow-through.
Well, you're talking about the old board employee figure? Well, that doesn't exist anymore. The board is eliminated as of 2011. So to take that hospitals off, I don't want it as evidence in my lawsuit.
Okay.
I'm dead serious. That's a serious matter.
We will take that off.
Yeah, the
I
authority
apologize.
receives no money
Sorry
from
for
the
that.
state, and nor should the state give us any money.
Okay.
And the state's doing a good job there. Secondly, very important. Is it retroactive about the annuitants, the change?
It's supposed to be for new annuitants.
So if an annuitant is presently working full-time, they can continue to work full-time?
That's what our understanding
To
of
the
that
best
is.
of our understanding?
Yes.
Yes, again, this is a prospective
Sure.
law. So if it's enacted, then on July 1st, or whenever it's enacted, then people who hired after that point will be subject to the 2/3 piece
Okay.
and the 75
Just
days.
after.
After.
Because there are some existing. And then finally, WISCNet. You went right by it, and I didn't hear what you said. I know you covered it.
I actually skipped
I
past
thought
saying
you did.
anything at all about WISNet.
All right. Can you tell us what you meant about that?
By not saying.
You wrote it, and then you went right over it. I thought I couldn't hear it.
That was
'cause I'm old.
It was definitely intentional.
Withdraw your question,
You
Councilman.
know, Frida, I've been at this 10 years with you, and sometimes we got to be careful. What do you mean by that?
Well, the change that they had in the last biennial budget, what they did...
What do you mean by that?
I'm trying to get
All right.
to it. Okay?
Let the witness answer her question.
You're the judge.
That's a defense attorney.
In the last budget, there were restrictions on the university's ability to participate in Internet 2 and to participate in in Wisconsin, which also participated with K-12 and other things. It has to be higher education. They made a change here that's related to the ability to do internet too. They did not change any of the provisions around the WISCNet.
So the WISCNet issue remains?
It still remains.
Okay, that's right.
And our legal counsel is leaving, so I guess I answered that right.
Nervous, Regent Pruitt.
Frida, I just want to get my arms around the GPR block grant concept.
Mm-hmm.
Is it connected to the sort of flexibility that under the governor's budget has been provided to the board in terms of compensation? So that, in other words, if that flexibility that is being granted to the board is not granted as a result of the legislative process going forward, we would potentially, that tuition, that block grant would go, some of those dollars would go back to the compensation fund of which our employees would then draw.
It's not automatic.
No, I know it's not automatic, but conceptually, is that the idea? I mean, the idea of this block grant, as I understand it, is to provide resources to then have the board and the university be able to have greater control of those resources and provide to employees. Is that?
Well, actually, it's part of it, but it's not the whole thing. The whole concept of what we did 2 years ago was to provide more flexibility for our institutions and for the board to use any dollars that came into the university more flexibly. Now, in the past, what would happen is when we got a budget, it would say, this is how much you have in salaries, this is how much you have in fringes, this is how much you have for utilities, this is how much you have for 50, 60 other things that they would put in there. What they did under the block grant was say, okay, we're going to give you money. You then have to prioritize what you use those dollars for. So part of it is, yes, related to the compensation because they moved basically the university's share, I guess, of a compensation reserve into that block. But some of it would be just any funding that they wanted to provide to the university that could be used flexibly. I did not mention, though, that they did add 2 new appropriations to our budget. One was related to the Carbone Center, and another one was related to the incentive grant so that they can see those dollars separately.
I mean, I ask only because I congratulate the governor on this budget and that particular provision and the linkages that seem to be here. I mean, this is something that we've been looking for a very long time. It is a major step forward, and I think that was why I was trying to get my handle on sort of how, if things start to move, if there is any effort as we go down this road to change any of these provisions, just some of the implications of that. There are a bunch of moving pieces here, and I just wanted to get my
We see this as a critical piece of what needs to remain in the university's budget along with the flexibility.
Bradley.
I also want to applaud the governor for thinking out of the box, and at least until somebody tinkers with the executive budget, it's very positive. According to the DOA summary, as I understand this, the governor's budget would move us ahead of corrections in our, what the citizens are going to be supported.
Yes.
But we're still at around 7.9% of the budget. Isn't that where we were before?
We were at about 7% for the 11-12 year, and we moved up to about 7.9 or so.
It says 7.9.
Yes.
And that's ahead of corrections.
Yes. As I said, it's nice to talk to you.
Just wanted to say one thing in addition to the WARM, which is a wonderful incentive and creative. They also provided about $7 million in funds for Medical College of Wisconsin for their campus. So there is a commitment to this type of research in medical, which is dear to my heart.
Joe.
We haven't talked about it among the other chancellors, but I think we're all excited about this budget as well. And I can say I've been here 6 years, and it's a new feeling to not be looking at some big cuts, and it's great that the economy is recovering and there can be some reinvestment. But to come back to that block grant let's say that some other constituency says, boy, they're getting, what was it, $89 million in new money. We're not getting anything. It might be better used somewhere else. If we don't get that money, what would be the impact on us?
Not getting that money would be basically a cut for our institutions. Of what magnitude, I can't really say. We know that we've got some very large increases in fringe benefit costs that would have been covered through the compensation reserve. And if there is a state approved pay plan, any of those dollars associated with an increase in pay plan would also be there. Any funding that is needed to help with the cost of new heating, new facilities, or even the debt service associated with operating a couple of our plants that we have, our heating plants, would all be in that particular area. So it would be very detrimental if that funding is not being managed.
Chancellor Wells.
Yeah, I agree with Joe, and I need a little clarification on that, too. This cost to continue, the $20.8 million, goes away in the future. They won't, because we understand that usually came later. So whatever, I'm asking a question, whatever is in that cost to continue the $20.8 million, what it's covering now, in the future would be covered in a block grant, or not?
Right. You're saying that in 2015-17,
right,
we would not have a need for most of that cost to continue, because any of the salary needs that we have, plus any of the fringe benefit costs that we have, would already be covered in this GPR block grant. And then whatever we needed for the next biennium, we would request as a part of that block. It wouldn't be requested as cost to continue.
That said, those numbers would be viewed as part of our base, which is, Rick, what we're talking about. Remember, my first question was, what base are we talking about in over 2 years? How many additional GPR dollars are coming in? And the answer is, after you slice it 6 ways to Sunday, it's 181.4, which is effectively more than we requested when the board submitted its budget request. Isn't that true, President Riley?
Isn't that true, Associate Vice President?
It is true.
Right?
So that was the kind of follow-up question. So is the incentive grant program for helping create jobs and close skills gap and support business would also likewise be continuing in the base, but the awards out of that grant program cannot be awarded in a continuing base way?
My sense of it is the question's premature.
Okay.
There's language that actually says that it cannot be base building. So that's part of how we'll have
within an institution's particular budget.
But what I would add is, when we go back and review the first round of these, if an institution merits reinvestment, that money could go back in that next round to that same institution, correct, Frida?
That is correct, and those are the kinds of things that working group's going to have to look at and make recommendations to the DOA secretary about.
And one way to think about it, a little different paradigm. You have to see how it plays out. And we obviously have to continue to make the case down the street as it works through the Assembly, the Senate, and the conference.
And the last thing, there will be, as a condition, potentially getting a second award, performance indicators, outcome indicators that we have to agree to, that will evaluate how the initial grant funds were invested and whether the outcomes were achieved or not. So we have to sit down with the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation and kind of work out what those performance indicators will be for that fund. Is that what I heard you say, something to that effect earlier?
We have to work with them on developing a plan for those,
Right.
yes.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
There's comment in here about sale of property. University property would no longer be exempt from sale or lease by the Building Commission and DOA. What, if there is some sale of property or lease, what happens to the net proceeds?
David, would you like to answer that question?
I believe the budget language requires that the proceeds from any net sale after the repayment of any outstanding debt on that property go to repay outstanding debt held by the state. So this is
even if we have a piece of property and we know what the encumbrance is, we know what the debt is. The debt's paid and there's an excess, it goes to pay off some other debt.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yep.
Who owns the property?
All property used by the university system is titled to the Board of Regents.
But we're a state
But the
agency.
debt isn't.
We're a state agency, we can be lapsed. It belongs to the state and the government. We shouldn't think otherwise.
Okay, thank you.
When we access property, we don't, other state agencies don't have a kick at the cat before we can dispose of it,
Not currently.
which is a unique flexibility on our part. So if we're at Eau Claire and we've got extra land and the city needs it, we can dispose of it, step toward goodness in Eau Claire without running the correct, asking corrections if they need it, right?
Correct. The real situation with university property is that we have nothing to sell for two reasons. And we've had incentive to look for property to sell for several years. We had a one-time budget cut of $20 million that we could recoup through the sale of land. We scoured, looked for land to sell. We were able to sell 2 pieces of property for a total of about $2.4 million of that $20 million. We've had incentives that the institutions can keep the funds if they have property under their jurisdiction to sell. Almost all of our non-contiguous property that is not contiguous to a campus under the academic core campus is deed restricted, that the proceeds of any sale goes to the donor or the Nature Conservancy or some other charitable organization. So even if the state sold it, they wouldn't get that money because that was a condition of the deed when we accepted the property. So we really have no property to sell is the bottom line.
Any other questions for Frida?
Related to something that we were talking about at the end of this morning, I just want to, I need clarification on terminology. So the budget message talks about by transforming part-time open enrollment program into the course options program, students of any grade who want to attend a university class, they can take up to 2 classes. So the course options program, where's that located administratively?
Tony, is that DPI?
I haven't been briefed specifically on it. I've read through it, and I think it's referring to open enrollment, for open enrollment.
But I mean, it's course options program in capital letters. So where is the course options program?
It's actually in the language surrounding the Department of Public Instructions. I don't know a great deal more about it. I did look into the statutory language that surrounds it, and it talks about the ability to then have universities participate as well as other schools. So it's expanding, I believe, the non-residency piece where students can go to other schools.
So, Tony, when they talk about the part-time open enrollment program, that's in DPI?
Right.
So, presumably, this new thing, the course options program, would be in DPI?
That's my belief, but I'm got all my money on it.
What money?
That's right. It's going to be so bad.
But it's just one of many programs right now that we have for working with high school students, as we talked about earlier this morning. There's the Youth Options Program, which was not removed, that I can see, and there was the CAP program that some of our institutions have, and that was not removed either. So there's a lot of confusion, I think, about exactly how this would work.
I just didn't, I
Right.
didn't know if they were talking about something that we had that I wasn't aware of or that we're going to have.
It's not in the university's
Okay, thanks.
language.
So we can get $150 a head from Tony on existing programs that we never get anything for before.
According to the language, Tony has to figure out what the cost is and then tell us how much money they're going to provide.
You want to help? We'll get it squared away.
Okay. How many more cohorts in the covenant, if there are any?
Let's see.
No, he's not.
It's an interesting thing. I can't remember. But
17 seniors in the last few.
yeah, but I think 2017 was when we thought we'd have the last student. Well, yeah.
All right, that answers it if it's good.
All right. Thank you, Frida.
I just wanted to say that, good budget from the governor. We want to thank him for that, for reinvesting in the university. We're going to have to work very, very hard to hold this through the legislative review. We're going to need the help of everybody around this table to do that and the help of a lot of other people outside the university, I think, to hold it. So we look forward to working with all of you on that as this moves forward through the legislative examination, and we hope on and pretty much like it came out of the governor's office into law. So thanks, Frida, for the presentation. Appreciate it.
Back to you for your report.
Yes, thank you. Regent Smith, again. As we did hear this morning from Brent, several colleagues and I testified last month at the Senate Universities and Technical Colleges Committee, chaired by Senator Harsdorf. Among the topics on our agenda for that committee was an update regarding the Human Resource System project. As I told the committee, and we've reiterated to the board, we are committed to solving these HRS issues both efficiently and expeditiously, and to providing regular, transparent reports on that progress as well as any bumps in the road that we encounter. So the following report is part of that commitment. To tell us more, here's Senior Vice President Michael Morgan. Michael.
Good afternoon. As it relates to Daryl Brazell from UW-Madison is going to be part of this report also. Just want to talk a little bit about the work that the UW Systems internal audit and financial services team are working cooperatively with the Service Center. They're working well together to develop solutions to problems related to the HRS overpayments and security challenges identified in the Legislative Audit Bureau audit report. The team continues, I think, to make good progress in looking at the technology, the people, the processes, and policies as we go through our effort to try to eliminate any further problems and challenges related to the operations of the system, either at the Service Center or on the campuses. And I'm happy to say that since our last gathering here, since the last board meeting, we have not identified any new problems related to overpayment. So in that sense, as we go through and look at the records, it's clear that hopefully we're getting near the end of any challenges as it relates to the look back. As it relates to internal audit, that's Elizabeth Dion and her group. They're actively working on a variety of projects, most particularly to validate procedures and processes that have been identified by the Service Center to ensure that those procedures and fixes that are being put in place to take care of the overpayments, whether it's for state group health or some overpayment in another benefits area, we want to make sure that those are effective, and Liz is doing a real good job, and we're relatively comfortable that the fixes that are being put in place, once again, both in the service center and elsewhere, are good fixes. In addition to that, we had some concerns about the integrity of the system, and Liz and her team have been doing some good work in terms of searching for what we characterize as, quote, ghost employees and other ghost employees in the system. And what we're trying to do is identify whether or not there's any fraud going on. That is, giving the security of the system and the access of 2,100 employees throughout the system. We want to ensure the integrity by satisfying ourselves that there is no fraud, that there aren't employees out there that are being paid and a fake bank account being set up and dollars being taken out of the university budget. So far, we have found nothing. So the integrity of the system seems to be good. We're also, as part of another piece of Liz's work, is working with the Legislative Audit Bureau. And she has been actively involved in responding to requests and fully cooperating with the Legislative Audit Bureau in their efforts. And I'm happy to say that communications and exchange of data and information has proceeded smoothly between our staff, both at the Service Center and here at UW System, and in our work with the LAB. Another area we've been working on is efforts to recoup health insurance premiums. As you know, efforts were on the way for us to get as many of those dollars back, and I think we have about $12 million that we need to recover in health premiums that were overpaid. We immediately recovered about $2.5 million of that amount, and you'll recall that we recovered all of the pension dollars. All 16 million of that has been returned. We're in contact with the Employee Trust Fund. That's because the ETF actually holds the contracts on all the insurance relationships that the system has. Tom Stafford, our General Counsel, is working closely with ETF's General Counsel and the Service Center to determine all the facts and to review the applicable law to the health insurance benefits that were overpaid, with a target of bringing back to the Board of Regents at the April meeting a strategy for trying to recover those overpayments. We want to be measured and deliberate in our discussions with the ETF, and so that we can bring back, hopefully, a successful plan for this board. It's going to be very, very difficult to recover many of those dollars, but we intend to be very, very aggressive in trying to recover as many of them as we possibly can. So you'll hear more from Tom Stafford at the next meeting. You'll recall also that we wanted to embark on a post-implementation risk assessment. Elizabeth talked about retaining an accounting firm. Well, we have made a selection in terms of an accounting firm. PricewaterhouseCoopers was selected by our group. We're in negotiations with them right now on a contract, and we're hoping to have them in place very soon to start to do the work necessary to ensure that we identify any post-implementation risks that might exist. This work will serve as like a third party looking over the work of both our internal audit group as well as Service Center personnel to ensure that we aren't missing anything that needs to be addressed in getting this HRS piece behind us. And then a finding in the LAB audit that came out late last year related to security. And there were three parts of this security funding. They recommended that LAB recommended that we limit access to data on HRS to those who need it to complete work or transactions, which makes a lot of sense. We have about 2,100 individuals who access the HRS portal. We are in the process now of executing on the plan that we have in place. We have a timeline for getting the work done. The work, we believe, according to our plan, we anticipate completing in fall of 2013. That is, we will have in place a new process and procedure that will limit access to certain data in our system depending on the needs of the individuals, those 2100s, to do their work. A second recommendation surrounding security was to remove programmers from having access to our system. Right now we have programmers who can actually go into the system, make programming changes, take those changes and put it in the production module without a review. Well, we've already removed the programmer's ability to do that. They can no longer get into the system. They don't have access to it. And any change that they may propose will go through an independent review before it is put into our production so that everyone is assured that whatever the changes are, they're consistent with the good running and management of the HRS system. The second piece to this is that there are current users who also have the ability to make program changes in the system. We're in the process of identifying who those individuals are, and we're also going to restrict their ability to make changes and then put those changes in production without an independent review. That piece of the work has not been done, but we anticipate that will be completed very, very soon. And then the last piece related to security revolved around credentials. That is, how do we assure ourselves that the individuals that we want to have access to the system are the right people gaining access to the system. Which means that we need to put in place more sophisticated security measures before we grant access to the system. And one of the things we're looking at is what we call a dual authentication system. It would be like having a password and a retinal eye scan before you could get into the system. Now, I'm not suggesting that we're going to actually go through the work of putting a retinal eye scan, but I think you get the point. We want to ensure that the integrity of the system is preserved and that those who have access actually are the individuals that we've granted access to. So that's what we're doing as it relates to the UW system team. And working with Daryl, Daryl and his team, we've also embarked upon a roadmap to take a look at, on the end-to-end analysis from the service center to the campuses, a look at policies, procedures, and other matters related to the operations of the system. But I'll let Daryl talk a little bit about that.
Great. Thank you, Michael. And just a little bit more on the reconciliation, just so people understand where we're at process-wise, what you had heard about with regard to overpayments related to the reconciliation for 2011. The reconciliation for 2012 is presently underway. We believe controls have been put in place to prevent future occurrences, and I know the system internal audit team is looking at that to ensure that that is in fact the case. You remember that's a unit that's been staffed up and reorganized. I think initially there were 1.5 FTEs devoted towards reconciliation. There are now 14 people working full-time on this particular activity. So hopefully, as was suggested earlier, we'll have good results to share with you. But again, that work is still underway. President Riley had asked us, and me specifically, to take a look at other kinds of things that we need to put in place to ensure beyond the stopping the bleeding, if you will, around benefits reconciliation. What do we need to do to truly return, as I would suggest, to best in class, for all of our HR on processing for payroll and benefits? And to do that, as we suggested, you need to take a look at policies. You need to take a look at processes that are driven by policies. You need to take a look at the people, and you need to take a look at technology in a more fundamental way. And so, given Assistant President a plan to do that, to really focus on that. Some of this work has been underway already, but what really needs to be undertaken is a real comprehensive look and significant changes made in a lot of our policies. There's too much complexity in the system right now. The HRS system has 197 modifications, far too many. And so part of the strategy here is to simplify the technology and allow it to really operate in more in the way that it was intended and in the way it was designed, so to speak. I'll give you an example just in terms of some of the complexities around benefits. Since the system went live, about 22 months ago now, there's been over 1 million job and data changes entered into the system. Over 550,000 of those changes have implications for benefits eligibility. And so you see the need here. So let me give you just a couple of examples of projects that are being undertaken right now. And I'll talk specifically about the benefits one. We have 12 different benefits planned, all with different start dates, end dates, termination dates. That needs to be aligned. And so to do that, though, we can't do that tomorrow because what we're talking about here are relationships between the Department of Employee Trust Funds and the vendor community. And so as those opportunities come up, ETF has expressed a willingness to work with us to try to provide that simplification that's really important. And so you have this complexity in terms of the different start, end, and termination dates, but when you overlay that with the reality, particularly at my institution, where it's not uncommon for an individual to have multiple appointments, and any change in appointment, again, oftentimes has a benefit eligibility determination. A second example of a policy change that's sorely needed, and we're getting wonderful response from the chancellors who we've talked with about this particular issue, is, and I'll give you a context here. You know, as many of you know, I spent most of my early career working in state agencies. State agencies, you have 26 pay events a year. On leap year, you have 27. Within our system, we have 951 pay events each year. So each institution, in essence, has its own set of pay events. We all agree that that needs to be simplified. Now, it doesn't have any implication for the academic year calendars, which are unique by institution, and for every reason, no reason why they shouldn't stay unique. But we don't need to tie the academic year calendars to pay cycles. So we need to decouple those things and to really simplify the pay cycles to allow the work to be more efficient and ideally over time to allow us to return some dollars back to our core academic missions. As I mentioned, a lot of work is already underway at the service center. There's been a significant reorganization. There's still some staffing up that's occurring. Created a new project management office to oversee the many projects that need to be undertaken. One of the fundamental changes in the technology that needs to be made to help not just with benefits reconciliation and beyond is to really change the orientation of how the technology is designed. Each of the modules work, but they don't work well together. They were kind of built a bit I guess, in a siloed fashion. And so, for example, if we make a benefit change for an individual, you don't have a view of the other benefit changes that might be appropriate as well. So we want to change the view in the technology to what we call a person view, or what ETF will refer to as a member view. So if I dial up Michael Morgan, for example, we can see all the benefits that accrues to him and to make changes accordingly at one particular time. And so that work, again, is underway. Another project is underway that you heard about last month. You heard about projects at UW Parkside and UW Stout. What's that about? This is really recognizing, again, if we're really going to get this right, you have to look at processes across the entire spectrum. In other words, transactions start at a departmental level oftentimes, move to the central campus, moves to the service center, then often moves to employee trust funds, then in turn moves to other folks, could be the IRS, could be healthcare providers, or the like. What we need to do is work with institutions similar to what we've done at 2 already to help them with their process, with process simplification, some streamlining, and then to make sure those processes are automated. So at the end of the day, we want the processes from the first entry in a department all the way to a vendor being paid to be automated. And we work with the employee trust funds on their end of the continuum as well. And so we want to focus right now on Madison and Milwaukee, obviously 2 large institutions, and then to move on from there to work with every other institution as we need to help simplify and streamline and automate their business processes as well. So again, that work is presently underway. And so we think we have a comprehensive strategy for this issue. Certainly, the strategy will be further informed by any findings by the Audit Bureau or through the risk assessment that's just beginning. But I think we have a strategy here that's resonating quite well with institutions as we've talked with them. I think there's a lot of agreement right now that beyond dealing with the benefits issue, there's a lot more that we can and should do to make this system much more efficient and responsive and to really function in the way I think that we all intended. And certainly, hopefully, at the end of the day, have a system that we can all feel proud about, and you know, whether it's this board or whether it's the citizens of the state of Wisconsin.
Thank you, dear.
So, that concludes our report, and if you have questions, we'd be more happy to try to answer them.
Questions for Darrell and Michael?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Darrell. Very good. Thanks for the work you're doing on this. One other topic, Mr. President, in my report has to be, I guess, the second most important topic in Washington, D.C. after the recent snowstorm and sequestration. Some of you know we're down in Washington. We were talking last night, with the snow coming in, they were talking about the snowstorm as snowquestration. But this is a complex topic. We've all heard a lot about it, I think, maybe too much if you follow the news and the media, but it's a series of automatic cuts to the federal budget that are applied evenly across most departments and federal agencies. As you may recall, I wrote a letter to our Wisconsin congressional delegation last week in advance of the March 1 deadline when sequestration kicked in, when those budget cuts were to go into effect. And in that letter, I pointed out that UW-Madison alone could lose about $35 million in research funding over the coming year, or 3.5% off its base of roughly $1 billion per year. While this may sound like a relatively small amount, that figure represents a lot of grants that will go unfunded and research projects that won't be undertaken. This effect will be compounded across the state, as every UW institution has projects that are supported by NSF, the National Science Foundation, which is scheduled for very deep cuts under sequestration. Of equal concern is the fear that research agencies will respond to these funding cuts by slowing down renewals and reducing the aggregate number of new awards that are approved. As I explained in my letter, this will result in fewer grants approved, less research undertaken, and a reduced capacity to grow the economy or advance medical care. Tom Still, who's president of the Wisconsin Technology Council, wrote about this issue in a recent column, pointing out the significance of these cuts, and I quote Tom, "The issue is more important to Wisconsin than most states because academic R&D is one of the relatively few areas in the federal budget where the state performs well. Wisconsin boasts a little more than 1.8% of the nation's population, but it attracts nearly 2.2% of the nation's R&D funding. The state also fares well in attracting its share of small business innovation research grants. These are the SBIR grants, which are awarded by 11 different federal agencies to companies and researchers with the most promising commercial technologies," unquote. There are still a lot of unanswered questions regarding sequestration, and much we don't know. Obviously, one of the big things we don't know is how soon the politicians will get together and stop its rollout, and we certainly all hope that will be sooner rather than later. We are grateful, though, I would say, as we mentioned earlier, that the sequester will not affect the Pell Grant program because it was specifically exempted from the funding cuts of sequestration. So both the 2012-13 award year Pell Grant payment schedules as well as the 2013-14 award year payment schedules that were released in January will be unchanged and will continue to provide a critical source of financial aid to our students with serious financial need. However, as I mentioned earlier, the campus-based financial aid programs, including the Federal Work Study and the Federal Supplemental Education Opportunity Grant, will not be spared, but will be reduced for the 2013-14 award year. And as I said, TRIO, Gear Up funding will face cuts, which will result in less pre-college programming, advising, and support services for underrepresented and first-generation students. So it's hard to know exactly how sequestration will be implemented, as federal agencies are currently preparing more detailed guidance. And in the meantime, we will continue to monitor how these cuts will impact those programs that the UW system and our students rely on. What we do know is now that the White House is cutting its public tours the revolution cannot be far behind. So I'm going to stop there. Chris Andrews, I think, is with us, our Assistant Vice President. On this side now, you switch sides on me. And then she can answer any more detailed questions about this that any of you may have. Chris has been monitoring this very closely. Questions? Chris? All right. We will keep you posted as events roll on in relation to sequestration. Thank you. Back to you, Mr.
All right. Are there any communications, petitions, memorials? If not, we'll take about a 5 or 10 minute break and go into closed session.